But I do want to move on to another sport because at the end of this month is the NFL draft. And you mentioned earlier that I was on the draft live stream with Dave and Cleve. And so if you want to check that out, it was streamed on the INC page. So you can go watch that. I was on for a couple of hours. The stream was like 4 hours. So if you're a draft guru or a degenerate, that stream is for you and looking at every single pick that happened. But a couple things happened in this draft that I want to talk about because you and I are not draft people and we have thoughts about people who like to go to the draft live. We're not going to get into that. But the Atlanta Falcons. So would you agree with me, and maybe this is bold, but would you agree with me that the Atlanta Falcons are a poorly run organization?
It certainly seems that way, yes.
Does it seem that way? And has it been forever, or do you think it's been more apparent since the 28-3 blown lead in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think Brady and Belichick broke the Falcons.
That is a very popular opinion. And it's not crazy because I think there are moments in a franchise's history that you could consider a seminal moment. A lot of people felt that there were seminal moments when the Patriots lost 18-1 and they continue to come back. And it does take a well-run organization in order to get there. But the Falcons, I feel like, are not. And so last year in the draft, Arthur Smith, who we talked about before, drafts Bijan Robinson at number 8. By the way, this is the third year in a row that they've had the 8th pick, which is a sign that you're poorly run.
Yes.
And they didn't use them, at least not to what the effectiveness that we would have thought. So here they come, 8th pick this year. Signed Kirk Cousins in the offseason, which I thought was a very good move. Let's go all in on a guy who's probably got a few more prime years left. They gave him $100 million guaranteed for 4 years. And then Roger Goodell reads the pick, and it's big Penix energy, Michael Penix Jr. from Washington. I'm not going to lie to you. I tried to justify it in my head, and it is easily one of the most confusing, if not the most confusing pick in first-round NFL draft history.
Yeah, to us casual fans, when you look at it, I think you say, what in the world? Like you just, like I said, the Kirk Cousins piece, and you're bringing this guy in who there was still higher rated quarterbacks on the board too at that point. There's a lot of questions about Michael Penix's health long term. And so, yeah, I think that alone, those things raise a lot of question marks. I did hear an interesting take from the controversial king himself, Colin Cowherd, and he said something along the lines of, like, he was supporting the choice is what he was doing. And he said, he goes, look at the, Brett Favre wasn't happy when the Packers drafted Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers wasn't happy when they drafted Jordan Love. That seems to be working out okay for that franchise. And if you're the Falcons, you can say, hey, we're in a division that's so bad that we're going to be able to compete for an opportunity to win the division. We've got a veteran quarterback that's won a lot of football games. And that doesn't have a lot of tread left on the tires. And by the way, we probably will have what you could argue it would be the best backup in the league. I get that, but man, with the number 8 pick though, like that's a lot of money to pay a guy to stand around and watch. And he did also mention though that he thought one of the reasons they took them is because there were he named 3 or 4 franchises that were attempting to get themselves to move up in the draft to take him. There were a lot of people, I guess, that were really, really high on him. It was interesting to hear that. And then, but you mentioned that like they didn't even really talk to the guy, which is also fascinating. I didn't hear that piece, and I don't know if it was on the ESPN broadcast or if you guys said it during the first round on Thursday, but someone said something along the lines of it's a typical case of we liked the guy until we met him. Like in reference to Kirk Cousins, like, maybe once he showed up, they're like, hey, we're not so sure about this dude. And I see that, what my dad there said, that the owner, apparently Arthur Blank, said he didn't want to see him playing for 5 years. I mean, this is the dumbest move ever then, if that's the case. That's a lot of freaking money to pay a guy to stand on the sideline for 5 years. I mean, that's through his rookie contract. That's through the entire contract. So you're going to basically sign him to a second contract before he takes a meaningful snap and as your starter. And then you better hope that the return on your investment to make it worthwhile is you better win 5 Super Bowls in a row at that point in time.
There are a lot of layers to this. And now I'm not a draft guy whatsoever. So when players or teams make draft picks, I assume that they're doing their homework. And we've heard baffling picks before, busts. Like Jamarcus Russell is probably the biggest bust in NFL history. And we know a lot of different things after the fact or whatever. But like his college career, he was a great quarterback in college. Like he had a big arm and a lot of different things. And when he was drafted, the Raiders needed a quarterback. You can understand taking a quarterback number one here. But there's a couple things I want to mention. First thing, of course, Colin Cowherd mentioned the Packers. Well, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers were both the franchise quarterbacks for a sustained amount of years when the team decided to draft a quarterback behind them. So you can understand their hesitancy as those guys, because you don't want to think about your career coming to a close. Tom Brady famously, or I say Giselle famously, got Jimmy Garoppolo traded out of New England because he also didn't want to believe that too. So this situation is a little bit different because you had no quarterback last year and you bring in this guy. Now there's something to be said about wanting to think about the future because the quarterback is older or whatever. But they didn't even talk to Kirk Cousins before they made this pick. That's also really weird too, because you would say, hey, Kirk, look, you're our guy. We're going to build around you. We're going to win now with you. But we also want to look out for the future. I think Kirk would say that makes sense. And yes, of course, if Kirk gets hurt, which is something that could be in the cards no matter what, he would have to worry about possibly getting his job back if Michael Penix comes in and does really great. So there's that. And you mentioned they did not have a meeting with him. I don't believe. I think they met with him for like 30 minutes. Barely saw him work out. He wasn't in their assessed top 30, which is just insane. And then Arthur Blank doesn't want him to start for 5 years. Well, I got a stat for you. So there's only been 2 quarterbacks who have ever made their first professional start at age 25 or older. And I'm going to say these names, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be like, not a one of those guys really blew the doors off the NFL. And that was Brandon Weeden and Chad Pennington. So
wow,
of the 2 of those guys, Pennington was better.
Pennington was solid, but
he was solid. But is that really what you're going for with the number 8 pick in the draft?
No, man, no, it isn't.
No,
it isn't. I was trying to talk myself into it.
You can't.
No
shade on Chad. No shade on Chad at all.
Yeah. I mean, because I think that you would, in some cases, you would take consistency over a decade. You would take, playoff football over the course of a decade, I think, in a lot of places. Like Cleveland, the Clevelands of the world. Hell, the Jets would probably be willing to dust off Chad Pennington and send him back out there if it meant a few more wins. That's really interesting. And if it does seem like the public perception based off that video that's floating around is that Arthur Blank was like not in on this pick at all. And
you could tell that. If you've seen the video of the GM trying to explain himself, that's a guy explaining why he should keep his job. No way that you can't convince me anything else.
Someone else had texted me about that. What in the world are Falcons doing? And I said, and my initial reaction was, well, they have a meddling owner. And these in cases where you have, they have a meddling owner who likes shiny things. So I really thought this was an owner's pick. I really thought this came from the top until we started seeing some of these other things. Because this was a very Jerry Jones-esque move. So it doesn't surprise me. And I like Michael Penix more than most people. I was impressed with him when we watched him down the stretch through the college football season. But
he did get exposed against Michigan a little bit, though.
Everybody did.
Yeah, they did. But that's the point, though, is like I think Washington was talented until they met a team that had more probably across the board talent than any other team they'd ever played. And Michigan was far and away the best team in the country this year, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to contradict you there, Dad, with there's going to be good quarterbacks in next year's draft. Because and Dave kept mentioning on the show the other night that the draft class, at least right now, the way it looks, that the quarterback draft class coming out next season is not very strong. Yes. Which would maybe lead a team to reach a little bit for a guy this year because there is more depth to the class as opposed to holding out until next year. But, to contradict what I said about them being in a poor division and having a chance to compete, you would think if you're that close to being able to win your division, and mostly because it's bad, wouldn't you draft a more immediately impactful piece? You'd think if you're that close. I don't know. It's puzzling, man. But watch, Michael Penix he'll be Tom Brady, but the next Tom Brady will be the next Pat Mahomes or something like that. Something crazy. It's
just it's unnerving because we talk about value a lot with the draft, which I think is really an interesting part of, especially the first round, when you try to think about what you could have spent there, your opportunity cost. And the Falcons now have done 2 really puzzling picks, or made 2 puzzling picks at the 8 position the last 2 years. And so it'll be interesting because Michael Penix, the thing about quarterbacks is Kirk Cousins comes in at what, 35. And Mike, my brother-in-law, always says this, that after the age of 30, they almost become like Jedis because they've seen everything. And so now if they weather that storm, then they can really elevate themselves. And like Matt Stafford is a really good example of that. Like once he got over getting hurt, started to see everything, wins a Super Bowl with a lot of talent around him. Michael Penix, though, is on the older side, and history has told us that when you get a guy that's that old, it takes, like, he's not going to get the time to really develop because he's not going to play right away. And you can't, if you have a win now team, getting a guy like that maybe needs a little bit of time, because like left-handed throwers too. I mean, Tua is obviously really good, but I told you, I feel like, or I think I said it on the feed, his throwing mechanics look a little slow to me. What happens when he's under, heavy pass rush? These pass rushers are so much faster across the board in the NFL. So there's a lot of factors I think that could go into Michael Penix really struggling. But the Falcons they should be in win now mode, and they just pissed off their quarterback. So like it's the strangest thing organizationally. And for the owner to not know, that means that the GM and the coach both made a choice without clearing it with the owner, and that is, oh my goodness, so disastrous.
Do you think that Kirk Cousins, though, he strikes me as a type of guy that doesn't get pissed? Like, I'm sure he certainly doesn't like it, but he doesn't strike me as the type of guy that you're afraid of making him mad. You're
No,
like, this guy is going to be a vocal problem if we piss him off or whatever. I think you're just like, hey, he's like, oh, well, didn't see that coming. Life goes on type of thing.
no, because I think that he is looking to prove himself because he's now been in two places and that narrative still
But
follows
if
him.
you're 35 and still looking to prove yourself, like that tells you everything you need to know. And I'm a Kirk Cousins fan generally. Like I've generally been supportive of him. But if you're 35 and you still feel like you have something to prove, then maybe it's just not in the cards.
Yeah, but imagine if you took a new job and then a week later they hired your potential replacement right afterwards. It's like, wait a minute, I just took this job and you're now all of a sudden you're hiring my replacement? Like you'd be like,
Sure,
what?
I get it, but hey, if you are who you think you are,
Denny.
you shouldn't be faced. There's plenty of evidence out there about Kirk Cousins and his abilities and where he struggled, and he's a very good quarterback. I think that he's a very high floor but low ceiling quarterback, and I think that he's pretty well maxed out, which again is great. Most people would take Kirk Cousins and what he's accomplished in the seasons he's put together. I just don't know that he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. I just don't think he has it. And not that every Super Bowl winning quarterback has it. I know that there are some, the Trent Dilfers of the world, but I don't know. He just doesn't seem to have that X factor that you need to be able. He can't do it by himself, for one. He's not that talented, and I don't think that the Falcons have enough pieces around him to put him in a position to be that successful.